Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. I think it's safe to say the theme for this week's briefings will be Black people and business. Speaking of which, the number of black businesses in America has gone up the last 7 years, believe it or not. When the Orange Man took office in 2017, the number of black-owned U.S. firms was 124,000. By 2022, the middle of the Biden years, that number had risen to 194,585. The black-owned firms' gross revenues soared by 66% during this time span, from an estimated $127.9 billion to $211 billion. Now, of course, this number only reflects firms. It certainly doesn't reflect the small businesses, the ones that are not necessarily registered with their city, state, etc. And while it's good that this number has gone up, it says a lot about how much we've been oppressed that even this dramatic rise in black businesses over the course of only a few years, which would easily make any other group the dominant economy, in our case, it still has us in the low single digits, lower than everyone else compared to our percentage of the population. That number is way too low. This is where these lawsuits from these white supremacist mouthpieces come in. They know that the white dominance in finance and business is artificial. They openly discriminate against black people. The only good thing that the Biden administration did was to highlight the enormous amount of redlining that has been taking place in the modern day. Not in the 1950s or 60s, but today. That's the one good thing I think came out of that 4 years. It's been documented now. So, with lenders blatantly refusing to lend to qualified black customers, you've had initiatives to aggregate money for black businesses instead. And then you have the white right sending in their paid operatives to file lawsuits saying that black businesses have to give the money to white people. Again, Democrats should be the main ones leading the charge against this. You cannot bridge the racial wealth gap by waiting for white businesses to do it. There's been laws against lending discrimination since the 19th century, and they're just ignoring these laws because they know that there's no punishment for it. So, there must be targeted economic programs specifically for the people who have been systematically locked out, because none of these primary lending institutions, which are white-owned and white-run, has been trying to lock white people out. Quite the opposite. White people are the ones who they actually lend to. When you've had deliberate targeted racial discrimination, you require targeted racial reparations. This is a fact that in the past, even open bigots like Lyndon Johnson and others were forced to give lip service to. But obviously, Democrats the last 35 years in particular have been colluding with the Republicans on a strategy of trying to close the book on that stuff because there's been too much progress made. Even though it was only a couple of inches, for white supremacy as delicate and fragile as it is, even that was too much. Black people are 13% of the population, but only 3% of U.S. firms. Meanwhile, you have other groups who are a greater percentage of firms than their own population numbers. You only get those kind of lopsided figures when someone has put their thumb on the scales. This is engineered inequality. This is why it's so important that we call out lies such as the one about immigrants who claim that they came to the U.S. with nothing but pocket lint and they managed to get over. In reality, what they got were all kinds of governmental benefits from day one. They get access to loans and credit because they're immigrants, and also because they're not black. White supremacy knows the rules of racism, it invented them, and that it's always been able to leverage immigrants, even black ones in a number of cases, to toe the line against us and maintain the racial pecking order. These numbers that you're looking at are not the result of hard work, dent in industry, nor is it the result of ingenuity or innovation. Absolutely no one has innovated more than foundational black Americans have, and that's a fact. That's part of the reason why every time we look up, we see all this rampant culture vulturing. Most of these people from these other groups are given ready access to governmental contracts, which is guaranteed income, and they use that to pay politicians to give them more contracts, which results in more money for them, and so on and so forth. A vicious cycle. You know, there's an old saying that when you see a turtle on top of a fence post, you know he had some help getting there. All right, that's at least part of the problem. So, what might be the solution? First thing that we can do is to stop hemorrhaging money. When somebody is bleeding out, the very first thing you do is to tie some tourniquets to keep their blood inside their body. Money is the lifeblood of all economic vitality. But in our case, that money leaves the black body politic the instant we get it. That's the first thing that needs to change, this economic hemorrhaging. Too many black people have made a habit out of making excuses for not exercising economic discipline. It's up to those of us with our heads on to start exercising a zero-tolerance policy for that. And I'm sure there will be the usual shills and plants and a number of non-black trolls in the comments who pretend to be black who will be saying, well, black people are never going to get it together. Black people are never going to stop doing this kind of self-defeating behavior, so you need to stop bringing it up, Professor Truth. Let me tell you something stupid. Over here in the land of black empowerment, we don't do defeatism. The entire reason that I started off with those stats is to show that we can get things done if we understand that we have to rely on each other. Because in my opinion, I don't think that it's a coincidence at all that this jump in the number of black U.S. firms happened during the pandemic. What happened was you had a lot of black folks who found themselves economically with their backs to the wall. And during the pandemic, a lot of black folks fought their way out of that corner. There were those who said that we would never discipline our vote, and we've shown that we've begun to do it, and the same goes for our dollars, too. We already know these anti-black racists hate black empowerment because for most of them, they've been able to rely on ignorant black people as customers. So when we talk about disciplining our dollars, these anti-black racists understand that a lot of them are going to go out of business. But there's a lot of black people who also fear black empowerment too, because power requires that you grow up, and too many of us want to remain children under white mommy and white daddy, even when the only thing we've gotten from them is abuse. Some black folks simply cannot envision a life without living under white supremacy. Well, let me tell you something. White supremacy will not last, even if subconsciously you hope it does. It's going to fall. I'm not telling you what I think, I'm telling you what I know. Now, when white supremacy falls, how are you going to eat? White mommy and white daddy aren't going to feed you. They won't even be able to feed themselves. When white supremacy finally goes out of business, you need to already have the mindset and the resources to make sure that you don't. There was a time when black folks understood that principle. The black Wall Streets weren't built by us sitting around looking for approval or customers hither, thither, and yon. It was built by keeping the dollars in the community. And that was the only time that we had actual prosperity and our economics in order. Our problem was that after white power ransacked our communities, we took our eyes off the bag and started chasing social approval and acceptance from the dominant society instead. Well, you can't pay your bills with colorblind chatter or a pat on the head from Fred or interracial sexual access. You need money. And we know that makes people from the dominant society uncomfortable when we talk about money, because when we do that, we're talking about who's going to be in control. Because a people who are poor are also a people who are weak, and white supremacy understands that its survival depends on keeping us in a weakened position. White power understands the need to look 20 and 50 years down the road, to examine the circumstances of today and extrapolate how events could develop decades from now. And then if you see any sort of challenges or troubles on the horizon, go ahead and try to head them off today. That's why as soon as they see you even murmuring about money, they go on high alert. And when these anti-black racists start to get agitated, well, that scares a lot of black people. You know what the most pathetic part of this fear is? We've shown time and time again that when we stick together, they can't stop us. Not long term, they can't. It's no exaggeration to say that the only ones powerful enough to defeat us is us. Sadly, though, in too many cases, that's exactly what our economic activity has been, self-defeating. Dr. Claude Anderson talks constantly about inappropriate behavior. We keep letting people practice economic and political colonization of us. We've all seen people who are not from our community who move around from place to place trying to run for political office in our neighborhoods, not for the sake of empowering us, but to try to get themselves a leg up on the political ladder. I know you've seen this too. People who never have anything to do with us at all, who in many cases attack us, who routinely kill black children in their stores, and yet when you look up, here they are trying to figure out if there's any Negroes dumb enough who are going to be actually voting for them. People who hold hands across America to demand that killers not be prosecuted should never get our economic support or support in any other way. We have to discipline our dollar, the same way we've finally begun to discipline our vote. People who carpetbag into our community should never get one single ballot from us. People who insult us, attack us, try to exploit us, refuse to ever spend their money with us, never ever speak up for our issues, these are people who should never get one thin dime from us. White power is able to enforce its will through economics. It can control who eats and who doesn't eat, and this is how it's able to incentivize tethers, shills, and bootlicks to undermine us from within. As I've long said, the problem we have with the enemy within is that these bootlicking backstabbers know that they can push anti-black propaganda against us, they can be the constant mouthpiece for white power, make total fools of themselves attacking us, and still be able to eat the next day because white power will feed them. Does anyone think that Candace Owens wouldn't be a bag lady in New Jersey somewhere if it wasn't for white right-wingers putting her on and funding her? She's a clown putting on a show for their benefit, and were it not for them, she wouldn't be doing it because she knows that we wouldn't feed her. Look what happened to Michael Steele. He was talking that same claptrap until the Republicans threw him under the bus. Now all of a sudden, he's had a come-to-Jesus moment about the Republican Party. Yeah, because they're not feeding him anymore. There's simply no substitute for organized money. Money talks. And when you spend it with people who hate you, you're saying that you don't mind being abused. On the other hand, when you discipline your dollar and refuse it to spend it with any anti-black racist, you're sending the clear message that their stomachs will touch their backbones before you see them get a dime from you. Too many people have been able to come into the black community and been able to bootstrap their own economies off of us and then use the money that they get from us to attack us. You teach people to respect you, because that which you cannot defeat you have no choice but to accept. I get it that some black folks don't mind, say, eating at restaurants that serve foreign food. Okay, but consider this. Black people created Southern seafood. That is a foundational black American cuisine. Now, you got people from the Middle East, Asians, Hispanics who are not part of this culture, and yet they saw an opportunity to make money off of black customers by setting up seafood restaurants. And of course, you've also had other groups who have set up fried chicken shacks like El Pollo Loco. Again, fried chicken is an FBA cuisine, and yet these immigrants have no problem getting into the food business outside of their own culture. If you as a black person want, for example, Chinese takeout or what have you, then learn how to make it yourself. Black culture has only ever improved everything that it's touched. That's why everybody tries to vulture off of it. Everybody tries to find a way to imitate it. Imagine if instead of giving this power away, we decided to wield it for our own benefit. Now, I'm not saying that any amount of FBA skill or creativity would make Chinese takeout or Mexican dishes into soul food, but I am saying that at least it would finally have a pulse. Dr. John Henrik Clarke talked about that if there's anything you're interested in, you're supposed to be a producer of it. You like cars? Then you should be the one making them. Or own a dealership or at the very least a repair shop. You like shoes? You should be making those. And if you like foreign foods, that's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm saying you should be making it. At least you won't have to wonder whether it's fresh or where the meat came from. It simply makes no sense that you have nothing but black people working at, say, the local Taco Bell, but you couldn't find a black-owned Mexican food joint to save your life. And you wouldn't have to worry about whether or not people outside the community wouldn't patronize such a restaurant. We spend enough money with these kind of places, we can make ourselves rich on our own. See, when we don't do that, we're hustling backwards. For too long, we've gotten the game all wrong. We've conditioned everyone to see us as nothing more than an ATM, and it lets them think that our only purpose is to be used. I think the pandemic put a lot of black people into a do-or-die situation, and as we've seen, we didn't die. But we still have so much more left to do, and that's the reason for this morning's briefing. To remind all of us that as black people, that dollar does have power. Sure, we may not have as much as everyone else, but we can change that if we start to take control of where that dollar goes. Dr. John Henrik Clarke said that black people will finally be free when we learn to look in the mirror and see a friend. I would add to that we should also learn to look in the mirror and see someone to do business with. Good day. And be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Alice Ransom, Jeffrey Williams, Frederica Moore, Mark Singleton, and Juan Latmore. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.